Hi, I'm Dave Priest, and I am a content producer and storyteller here on the DevRel team at AWS. And I'm also kind of new to the cloud. So I'm using this series as an opportunity to learn more about the concepts that underlie cloud technology. But I can only get so deep myself. So I thought, why not bring in some of my colleagues, like Brian Ketelsen, who's a principal developer advocate at AWS, and basically get some really good insights from them about how these concepts impact the cloud and the industry in more material ways. Brian, welcome to the show today, and I'm looking forward to talking to you a little bit about just like the cloud in general. This is our first really big episode discussing it. So thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about the cloud. Interesting fact is that when I started working in the cloud, I had brown hair. So we definitely have a lot of experience to go by, and I'm looking forward to sharing some. I was definitely in industries where it was not okay to be in the cloud for a long time, up until maybe 2010 or so. That shifted a little bit, and that's really when my cloud journey began. So, for the last 12 or so years, I've been doing a lot of cloudy things, and some of those as an engineer, some of those as a manager, and even several of those as a CIO. So, I understand the ramifications of engineering decisions as well as the cost decisions that go into cloud.
Interesting. Now, I mean, it's interesting that you kind of phrase it like that, right? Where you spent many years in sort of IT, but you weren't really like allowed to move into the cloud for a little while. I mean, like it's interesting just thinking about the history. If we take a second, like a sidebar, to talk about that for a second. Essentially, what you have is the parallel rise of personal computers and of networking in the second half of the 20th century, culminating in the internet at the end of the 80s and beginning of the 90s. But the way networking originally worked was, first, you were connecting various consoles or dummy nodes to a shared computer, like a mainframe or something. And then, when computers got smaller and more people had them, you were connecting computers to each other over larger distances using these shared protocols for how the exchange would happen. But again, this was mostly for communication purposes. Once the internet became a thing, though, websites needed a place to actually store their stuff, their text and images and so on. And eventually, those websites were doing more than just storing information, they were facilitating sales and deliveries and so much more. And that couldn't just fit on a business's computer, they needed servers, and lots of them. Of course, that scaled up over the years, and by the late 90s and early aughts, the full value of cloud storage and computing is becoming increasingly clear. Amazon Web Services gets into the game in the mid aughts, followed a few years later by Google and Microsoft and so on. And after that, around 2010, is when people really started to take cloud tech more seriously in a wider variety of industries. But that adoption wasn't necessarily super smooth, right?
Well, definitely in the early 2010s, financial services industries where I spent a lot of time, it was completely taboo to consider leaving your data in the cloud. We were talking about credit data or maybe healthcare data, and there was a perception for the longest time that it was impossible for anybody in the cloud to have a more secure environment than you can make in your own data center. And
Interesting.
it didn't take too many big breaches in people's data centers for the industry as a whole to start understanding, maybe the cloud offers me more and better security than my own data center does. All of those brilliant people working in the cloud vendors, they might be better than the people that I had working in my own data center. So that shift, um, started to take place, at least in my world, in the early 2010s.
Okay, interesting. And it was primarily, you would say, at least kind of from what you saw, it was primarily driven by security concerns?
Yeah, there was
Huh.
definitely. I know working with some major U.S. banks and global banks, uh, anything in the cloud was a non-starter.
Hmm.
If we're doing business with them, no data could be in the cloud, and then that dramatically changed over just the course of a few years. I have to start by saying that elastic and elasticity is so overused in our industry, it almost loses any possible meaning.
Hmm.
When you're talking about scaling your internet presence, uh, it's definitely a spectrum. You start on the one end of the spectrum, you've got your own data center and you've got servers and racks, and
Hmm.
that's a very fixed um, capability. I've got three servers, I can serve this many people, and that's it. At the absolute other end of the spectrum in the cloud, you've got serverless. So obviously there's still servers there, but the capacity to serve traffic is only limited by your hosting provider and how much compute power they have. You can
Hmm.
scale almost infinitely, and those are the two ends of that spectrum. So in the middle, you've got maybe moving to virtual machines in the cloud, and then maybe moving to containers in the cloud, and then from containers moving up to serverless. So different levels of cloud adoption offer you better scalability, better elasticity at the cost of adopting particular mental model of doing your work. So
Hmm.
at the I own my data center level, you have complete control over every piece of the hardware, every piece of your stack. I only want to use HP servers. I only want to use these network cards. We're going to have this particular version of operating system running. You control every ounce of that. And at
For
the
better or
other
for
end of
worse,
yeah, for
because
better or
that's
for
because
worse,
you have to have
absolutely
like overhead for that, right? Like you have to
right.
have the engineers and stuff that actually are able to stay on top of all of that,
hmm
correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. But there may be, you may even perceive that there's an advantage to being able to control that. Whether that's
Right.
true or not, that's a business decision.
Mhm.
And then at the other end, something like the serverless functions, Lambda, um, you have very little control over that operating environment. It becomes more and more lately, but you can choose a programming language. But most of the rest of that is just kind of fixed by the cloud provider, and you give up a little bit of that uh, capacity to make really big changes in the environment, but what you gain is that infinite scalability.
Hmm.
And again, I've seen this as a gradual adoption. People are like, you pry my servers from my cold dead hands. Serverless is ridiculous. I was definitely, I mean, you could look at my Twitter history in 2000, 2008, 2000, no, I'm sorry, 2018, 2017. It's just, serverless is stupid. Why would I ever do this? And now I don't want to own a server. I don't want to host a server. I don't want to touch a server. Somebody else can maintain that. Why should I do any of that? Just here's my function. Let's go run it. Let's make this happen. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And you can choose uh, which capabilities you want at any given time, and you can set a maximum. You can say, okay, we can only have five people in our house streaming at once. To
Okay.
continue your Netflix analogy, with cloud computing, you could set caps on how much you want to scale.
Hmm.
But the fact that you have that control is really powerful. Again, when
Yeah.
you're managing your own servers in your own data center, what happens on Black Friday when you have the most popular widget on the planet and people are coming to buy it and your servers are just melting under the pressure? Your server administrators are not happy.
Mhm.
It's the classic case for the elasticity of cloud compute.
Yeah.
Shut it
Yeah.
down when you don't need it and set it to auto scale when you do.
Yeah. I think I saw an article recently that was talking about like chat GPT and like just the amount of resources, like computing resources that was using daily. And it's like, man, like I would not want to develop an AI like that and put it on the internet and not have caps on
Yeah,
on how much data I could use. I think they're racking up like, I mean, they've got to be racking up like so many, like just so much money and costs for that computing power daily based on how many people are using that.
yeah.
So
I
yeah,
actually had the thought 2 or 3 days ago that Chat GPT is like the world's greatest loss leader.
yeah, for real, for real. So okay, so you talked a little bit about like there's that spectrum, right? Of like you have your own servers, and then there's like fully serverless, i.e., like the servers belong to Amazon or whomever, and you are using kind of like the services that they have to like kind of get certain capabilities from those servers. But in the middle, I mean, what does that look like when you're talking about like having your own virtual machine or something? Is that virtual machine on like an Amazon server, and but it's like a more controlled environment that you have like some kind of control over? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's exactly it. The Amazon or whatever cloud provider has really powerful machines that they carve up into smaller slices and rent to you. And those virtual machines can use disks that are larger than you can have in a single server. So you can use network attached disks. You can do a lot of neat configuration things that you just can't do with a physical server. And probably the most exciting and important thing in that list is being able to create stamps, these templates of servers that you want, and just spin new ones up when you need to. So, today I need 10 servers running to get these tasks done. Tomorrow I might need 15. I can just press a button and create new clones of the existing servers that I have because I took the time to create these templates. You have the choice of automating the whole thing and letting the platform do most of the hard work, or you can go in and fine tune every last bit of it if that's your preference.
Okay.
It's not mine anymore, I can tell you that. It really boils down to how much of the Kool-Aid you've had.
Yeah.
So, if you buy into the idea that thinking about cloud compute and storage and functionality in the way that your cloud vendors think saves you time and money in terms of deployment and engineering. Um, if you adopt that model, you'll have faster, more flexible deployments, and you'll have an easier time deploying your software, your services, your functionality. Um, but you don't have to drink the whole cup of Kool-Aid all right away. You can start small. You can create virtual machines. You can deploy your services the old-fashioned way on your virtual machines in the cloud, and then make more of them. And then someday you might say, "Wait a minute, why don't I create an auto-scaling group for this so that when my demand goes up, I don't have to page somebody in the middle of the night." And you can take your own um, growth path into the
Yeah.
cloud. It's
Yeah.
not necessary to dive all the way into every last bit, but it's a good progression to make over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have two comments on that. The
Yeah.
first is, with your C-suite hat on, the thing that you want your employees to be doing is the thing that adds value and the thing that
Mm.
differentiates your company. And I promise that 99.95% of the time, managing infrastructure isn't the thing that differentiates your company.
Interesting.
There are times where it is. You might be building some amazing technical thing that requires fancy infrastructure, but most of the time you're not. You're taking data, you're putting it on disk, you're manipulating it, and you're displaying it to people in unique and interesting ways that solve business problems.
Mm.
And that 99.95% of the case, there really isn't a reason to manage your own servers anymore, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Let somebody else manage all of that for you, because it's not where you're adding value to your company. You're adding value to your company by solving business problems, not by managing hardware and software. It almost democratizes the whole process. Today there are open source frameworks that allow you to build AI ML models with elastic compute. I use that word, sorry, but with elastic compute that you can spin up instantly and spin back down when you don't need it.
Mm.
You're going to pay $500 to spend hours and hours building this model, but that's so much cheaper than spending $500,000 on the infrastructure required to actually have that hardware to train the model. So it means that
Right.
I can build a model and train it overnight or over a couple weeks or whatever it is, and only pay for the time that I really need that massive amount of compute to do the processing work. And when I'm done, I push the button and walk away from those resources, and I don't have to pay for them again. So
Interesting.
it definitely puts uh, large capabilities into the hands of average people like me.
Interesting. So, do you feel like, I mean, just, obviously this is anecdotal, but do you feel like anecdotally you've seen um more like just sort of regular people, individuals experimenting with different kinds, like you mentioned machine learning, for instance, like I know that there's been a lot more experimentation in the last, 5 to 10 years with different kinds of AIs like Chat GPT or different artificial intelligences that are being run, put out on social media or whatever and tested. Is that in part because of the resources made available by the cloud? Um, is is that happening more commonly among individual people? What have you seen?
I definitely see people accessing compute resources that they just didn't have the capability to do before. I think when you get to the level of something like Chat GPT, that's not something that you or I are going to do over the course of a weekend or a month or a year or 5 years. That's hundreds of thousands of people doing lots of really hard work and building upon the work that others have done.
Mhm.
But step down below Chat GPT, and there's definitely inference models and models that you can build on your own and training that you can do on your own, in a very quick time frame that just couldn't be done before. And I see lots of people doing that.
Hmm. Interesting.
And the same
Um,
on the developer end of the spectrum. A lot of my time I spend writing code. Um, we used to chase the most expensive and most powerful developer workstations to be able to compile faster, to be able to get code written faster, because time is money in software development. But now I don't care at all what the specs of my laptop that I'm sitting at are. All of my code lives in the cloud. I turn it on when I need it, and I turn it off and don't pay for it when I don't need it.
hmm,
So, I've got instant access to machines that are far more powerful than any laptop I could afford to buy. And I pay by the second for when I need to use it, turn it off when I don't. For normal people, I think the trend will continue to make more and more powerful computers and processors. Uh, but the operating systems themselves are moving features out into clouds.
hmm,
So your phone is doing all kinds of amazing things with machine learning locally. But if there's something that's a little bit more than your phone can handle, it sends a request out to the cloud, and the cloud handles it. Laptops are the same way. You'll see um, more and more local processing of things, and then laptop vendors moving services out to the cloud when it just can't be completed locally.
hmm. Now, I know too. I mean, one of the things that I have read a little bit about is obviously there is local computing, like you're talking about, local processing, and then there's cloud computing that's happening. But there's also edge computing. What can you talk a little bit about what edge computing is and how that fits into this equation?
Yeah, edge computing's a relatively new concept, at least in terms of the the wording edge computing. It's been around for a long time, but as a marketing branding concept, edge computing is relatively new, and it's the idea that um, you provision some of your cloud services right next to your users. So, in a cloud vendor like Amazon, we've got multiple data centers across the globe. Um, but most everybody's using just a handful of them. They're using the ones in Virginia. They're using the ones in Oregon. They're using just a handful of data centers. But with edge computing, we have smaller data centers that are right near our your customers, like say Tampa, where I live, and you can provision some of those services to take actions or provide content that is relevant to customers in that particular geographic region and do it really quickly.
Hmm.
So we all know that physics is the limitation of computing power, and it doesn't matter how fast your servers are. Electricity can only travel over a wire at a certain rate. So if we're moving data between Tampa and Oregon, it's going to take a fixed amount of time, no matter how much I want it to be faster. But
Yeah.
if I'm moving data between my house and a server in Tampa, that's significantly faster. So pushing some of those decisions out to the edge, closer to the customer, provides a better response for the customer, and it makes the experience better and it makes it feel faster.
Hmm. So this is like the equivalent of when we went from dial-up to broadband internet, right? Where like suddenly it felt like waiting for dial-up internet felt like, just like this eternity where you're waiting for these connections to be established, and then, broadband is the new normal. Now I get super
Yeah.
annoyed if I have to wait for like 3 seconds for a video to buffer. Is is speed the main thing that's changing with edge computing? Like, is that basically the big value that's added? And is it to what degree is it actually perceptible by like a normal person? And or does it just become perceptible when you're doing like much more ambitious large scale computing?
No, it's definitely, even at the lowest levels, edge computing can make a huge difference in terms of the perception of speed.
Hmm.
But it also allows uh, your teams to build things that are far more flexible than they would be if everything was in a centralized computing location. And maybe an example of that could be a political example. Or let's say we can't use the word internet when we're talking to customers in Iran. So we build an edge service that translates the word internet into tubes,
Hmm.
because that's fun.
Yeah.
And we can do that. We can say, all of the content for this particular geographic region is going to go to this edge server, and the edge server is going to transform our content into something different that's uniquely suited for this particular area.
Hmm.
So
So you're
it's
able
not
to
just speed, it's flexibility and power that you have with edge
Interesting.
computing.
Yeah. So you could be doing like kind of strategic localization um in at a larger scale using the infrastructure of edge
Yes.
computing.
The um, the capabilities that the cloud is bringing almost evolve in orders of magnitude every year, or every 2 or 3 years, and that was the turning point for me when it was just utility compute and utility storage. Okay, I can do that locally. I can do that at somebody else's server. That's fine. But when you get to the point where you're doing the amazing things that are happening on the cloud now, uh, as a single developer, as a single person, I can't keep track of all of those things at all.
Mhm.
We're way past that point now. So having the ability to move that out where someone else can manage those things, it really makes all the difference. It's far beyond what a person or even a small team can manage anymore.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that was the turning point for me.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, as you mentioned, so much of the innovation that's happening, because it's not just what's profitable for companies that goes way beyond infrastructure. But so much of the innovation that's happening goes way beyond infrastructure. And so for people to be able to start kind of with that infrastructure side taken care of just means that speed of innovation, as you say, it really does seem to be accelerating just so quickly. It's fascinating to see, and I'm sure I'm going to have to do an update to this video and this discussion in like a year or two just to cover all the stuff that's happened since we've had this video. But for now, thank you so much for talking. This is really useful, and it's always very enlightening to have these conversations with you. And yeah, I look forward to exploring this topic more and in more depth in future videos. Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
David.
And with others on the team in the coming months. My kids are super loud.
Thanks for having me, David.